The email subject line read, "Architectural violation, immediate action required." I already knew what it was about. The flood wall. They called it visually disruptive. One board member called it a concrete scar. Another described it, during an HOA meeting, as apocalyptic landscaping. What they didn't call it was necessary. My house sits at the lowest point of the neighborhood. Not dramatically low, just enough that during heavy rain, runoff from 3 uphill cul-de-sacs funnels toward my yard before draining into the creek behind my property. It had flooded twice in 5 years. Not catastrophic, but enough to soak insulation, warp flooring, destroy drywall. After the second incident, I stopped trusting 100-year storm language. So, I hired a civil engineer. We studied runoff patterns, elevation maps, historical rainfall data. The solution wasn't dramatic. It was practical. A reinforced concrete flood wall, 3 feet high, running along the rear and side perimeter of my yard. Subtle slope redirecting water toward a drainage channel. Not pretty, not decorative, but engineered. Fully permitted by the county. Stamped. Approved. Inspected. And very, very effective. Apparently, that didn't matter. At the next HOA meeting, the Architectural Review Committee displayed printed photos of my backyard on a projector screen. Like evidence. "It looks industrial," someone said. "It's not in harmony with the neighborhood aesthetic," another added. I stood and spoke calmly. "It's engineered flood mitigation. Approved by the city." The HOA president smiled politely. Municipal approval does not override community design standards. There it was. The phrase they loved. Community standards. 2 weeks later, the fine arrived. $1,000 for unapproved structural modification. Escalating monthly. They demanded removal or aesthetic alteration. Aesthetic alteration of flood control infrastructure. I considered fighting immediately, but I knew how these things go. HOAs rely on pressure. Most homeowners don't want tension. They comply. Or they compromise. So, I submitted documentation. Engineering reports. City permits. Drainage impact analysis. The response? The structure remains non-compliant due to visual impact. Visual impact. Not safety. Not legality. Visual impact. Meanwhile, weather forecasts started shifting. Late-season tropical system forming offshore. Slow-moving. Heavy rainfall predicted. Meteorologists were careful with their language. Significant precipitation potential. Localized flooding risk. Historic totals possible. The neighborhood group chat lit up with casual comments. Hope it misses us. Probably just rain. Stocking up on batteries. I checked my drainage channel. Cleared debris. Inspected the wall. Solid. 3 days before the storm was scheduled to make landfall, I received the second fine notice. $2,000 total now due. Final warning before lien consideration. Attached was a reminder. Failure to comply may result in forced remediation at homeowner expense. Forced removal of the one structure designed to stop floodwater. The irony wasn't subtle. The night before the storm arrived, the sky turned a dull metallic gray. Humidity thick. Wind uneasy. You could feel pressure in the air. I walked the perimeter one last time. The concrete wall wasn't pretty. It didn't match the trimmed hedges and decorative stone fences around it. But it was anchored deep. Rebar reinforced. Drainage ports calculated to exact flow thresholds. It wasn't aesthetic. It was mathematical. Around midnight, the rain started. Not heavy at first. Just steady. By 2 a.m. it was pounding. Sheets of water. Gutters overwhelmed. Street drains gurgling. I stood at the back window watching runoff build along the uphill streets. Water began streaming down the slopes. Exactly as modeled. Exactly as predicted. It rushed toward the lowest point in the neighborhood. Toward my yard. And toward every mansion built slightly below grade because developers wanted level back patios. By 3:15 a.m., the creek behind my property breached its banks. Water surged forward. For a brief moment, it pressed hard against the flood wall. A wall the HOA had called ugly. The water rose. then diverted, sliding along the reinforced slope, redirected into the drainage channel, flowing past, around, away. My yard held, but beyond my property line, I could hear shouting, car alarms, a transformer popping in the distance. I stepped onto the covered patio and looked toward the uphill estates. Headlights flickered, garage doors opening in panic, and in the glow of streetlights reflecting off rising water, I saw something the HOA hadn't planned for. The runoff wasn't stopping, and the mansions built without mitigation were about to learn what visual impact really meant. By 4 a.m., the neighborhood didn't sound like rain anymore. It sounded like emergency. Car alarms wailed. Dogs barked nonstop. Somewhere uphill, someone was yelling instructions into the dark. I stepped back inside and checked the exterior cameras. The water line along my flood wall had peaked just under 2 feet before stabilizing and sliding along the diversion channel exactly as engineered. Textbook performance. But beyond the wall, chaos. The uphill cul-de-sacs were no longer gently sloped driveways. They were rivers. Water had nowhere to go. Developers had prioritized symmetry over drainage. Level lawns. Decorative retaining stones. No true diversion channels. The runoff that once spilled into my yard was now pooling against their own patio edges. Because my flood wall didn't block the water entirely. It redirected it. And water always finds the next lowest point. At 5:12 a.m., the neighborhood group chat exploded. Is anyone else flooding? Our garage is filling. Water coming through the back doors. Call the city. Photos followed. Luxury patios submerged. Pool water blending with stormwater. French doors leaking at the seams. One image stopped me. It was the HOA president's house. Her backyard, the one directly uphill from mine, was completely underwater. The decorative stone border she once praised during a board meeting was invisible beneath brown floodwater. Her walkout basement lights flickered on and off. By 6 a.m., emergency services blocked the entrance to the subdivision. The creek had overflowed into the access road. Residents with lifted trucks tried maneuvering through standing water. Sedans stalled. Someone's Tesla alarm screamed continuously. Meanwhile, my property? Dry. The patio was wet from wind-blown rain, but the lawn was intact. The garage floor clean. The foundation untouched. Because 3 feet of reinforced concrete doesn't care about aesthetics. Around 7:30 a.m., there was a knock at my door. It was my next-door neighbor, soaked, barefoot, shaking slightly. Your yard, it's dry, he said, staring past me at the back window. It's holding, I replied. He looked stunned. Our basement's flooded. 2 inches already. We thought the water would run downhill. It did, I said carefully. He followed my gaze to the flood wall. The same wall the HOA had found. The same wall called a scar. Now it looked less industrial. More intentional. By mid-morning, the rain hadn't stopped. Insurance adjusters hadn't even begun responding. Pumps were running everywhere. Extension cords snaked across driveways. Neighbors carried soggy rugs and boxes onto sidewalks. The group chat tone shifted. No more jokes. Just panic. Around noon, another message appeared. From the HOA president. Reminder. Please document damage for insurance. The board will coordinate with the city regarding drainage concerns. Drainage concerns. I read that twice. Drainage had been discussed before. In fact, I'd brought it up at a meeting after my second flood. Suggested a community-wide runoff assessment. It was dismissed as unnecessary. Rare weather events, they called it. Now rare was flooding 5 homes simultaneously. By late afternoon, the rain finally tapered. The creek began receding. But the damage was done. 3 homes reported basement flooding. 2 had garage-level intrusion. 1 had water entering through rear sliding doors. My house. Dry. At 6 p.m., I received an email. Subject: temporary suspension of violation proceedings. The body was brief. In light of recent weather events, the board is pausing enforcement related to your perimeter structure pending further review. Pausing. Not rescinding. Not apologizing. Just pausing. I stepped outside as the clouds broke slightly. The flood wall stood solid, streaked with mud from where water had pressed against it. It wasn't pretty, but neither were soaked hardwood floors or insurance deductibles. Across the fence line, neighbors were still pumping water from basements. The HOA president stood in her yard directing contractors, her once manicured landscaping flattened. For the first time since the fine started, no one was calling my wall ugly. And the storm wasn't finished with its lesson yet. Because once the water recedes, assessments begin, and numbers tell a much harsher story than aesthetics ever could. By the third day, the rain was gone, but the smell wasn't. Wet drywall,
Mud.
soaked insulation. Contractor vans lined the streets like a parade of regret. Industrial fans hummed from open garage doors. Dehumidifiers ran nonstop. Carpet rolls sat in soggy piles at the curb. The floodwater had drained. The financial damage was just beginning. Insurance adjusters moved house to house with tablets and cameras. I watched one spend nearly 40 minutes inside the HOA president's home. When he left, his expression wasn't optimistic. Later that afternoon, a special emergency HOA meeting was announced. Community flood impact discussion. Attendance was mandatory for board members. Strongly encouraged for homeowners. The clubhouse was packed. No projector slides this time. No printed photos of my backyard. Just frustration. We've never seen water like that. The drainage system failed. The developer should be responsible. Someone mentioned infrastructure upgrades. Someone else mentioned a community-wide assessment fee. That got attention. Then slowly, the conversation turned. To be fair, one homeowner said carefully, there was at least one property that didn't flood. Silence. Several heads turned toward me. I didn't say anything. The president shifted in her chair. That structure redirected water, she said. Redirected, not blocked. Important distinction. Another neighbor spoke up. It looks like it worked. No one laughed. No one called it ugly. A civil engineer, who lived 2 streets over, raised his hand. I reviewed the runoff patterns this week. The lowest properties without mitigation were always vulnerable. The wall didn't cause the flooding. The grading did. That changed the room. Because blame had been floating aimlessly. Now it had direction. The board discussed commissioning a drainage study. Cost estimates floated between $40,000 and $75,000. More murmurs. Then came the uncomfortable question. Should we reconsider the violation issued for that flood wall? All eyes shifted again. The president inhaled slowly. The structure still doesn't meet aesthetic guidelines. The engineer replied calmly, aesthetic guidelines don't stop water. No one disagreed. By the end of the meeting, a vote was proposed. Temporarily suspend enforcement of flood mitigation structures pending engineering review. It passed. Unanimously. That alone would have been enough irony. But the numbers hadn't fully landed yet. Within a week, rough insurance estimates circulated privately among neighbors. $18,000 in basement remediation. $32,000 in garage repairs. $12,000 in flooring replacement. One home exceeded $80,000 in total projected restoration. And those were insured numbers. Deductibles alone were 5 figures for some. Meanwhile, my only expense that week? Power washing dried mud off concrete. The HOA board scheduled a follow-up meeting, this time with the city's stormwater department. During that session, an official made something painfully clear. Future rainfall patterns are trending more intense. Flood mitigation should be encouraged, not discouraged. Encouraged. That word echoed in the room. Because months earlier, I had been fined for exactly that. After the meeting, something shifted socially. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stopped by to ask about contractors. About wall depth, rebar spacing, drainage port sizing. One even asked for my engineer's number. The same engineer whose stamped drawings the HOA had dismissed as visually disruptive. And then came the email. Not a pause. Not a suspension. A formal notice. Violation rescinded. Fines voided. Account balance adjusted to 0. No further action. No apology. just compliance correction. But reputationally, it was louder than an apology, because everyone knew the wall they mocked had protected the only dry foundation in the flood zone. And quietly, conversations began about updating HOA guidelines, about resilience, about infrastructure. Because once you see water in your living room, curb appeal becomes negotiable. The storm had passed, but the narrative? It had flipped. And the board was about to face a much bigger question than aesthetics. If one homeowner solved a problem they ignored, what did that say about leadership? 2 weeks after the storm, the neighborhood looked normal again. Fresh mulch, new drywall deliveries, contractor signs staked into lawns. On the surface, recovery was underway. Underneath, insurance battles had begun. Deductibles were hitting hard. Premium increases were being discussed. One homeowner discovered their policy had limited flood endorsement coverage. That conversation spread quickly. Because suddenly, this wasn't about inconvenience. It was about long-term cost. The HOA scheduled another board meeting, this one labeled Infrastructure and Resilience Planning Session. Attendance overflowed into the hallway. The same architectural committee that once displayed photos of my wall now presented elevation maps, highlighted zones, flow simulations. The engineer neighbor had volunteered to assist. He projected a runoff model onto the clubhouse wall. Colored lines traced water paths through the subdivision. Every heavy rainfall funneled toward 3 specific lots. Mine had been one of them. The difference? Mitigation. Without structural intervention, he explained, future events will produce similar outcomes. Someone asked what structural intervention meant. He didn't hesitate. Retaining systems, diversion channels, perimeter barriers. In other words, walls. The HOA president sat unusually quiet. No commentary about harmony or design cohesion. Just numbers. Then came the uncomfortable financial proposal. A community-wide drainage retrofit study. $60,000. Potential shared infrastructure improvements. 6 figures. Special assessment likely required. Murmurs turned sharp. That's thousands per household. Why wasn't this addressed during development? Why weren't we warned? No one asked why a single homeowner had to solve it independently. But everyone understood. Toward the end of the meeting, the engineer said something that shifted the tone permanently. One property here already demonstrates effective mitigation. The design is compliant with municipal standards. Rather than penalizing it, we should be studying it. Not mocking. Studying. A motion was introduced. Revise architectural guidelines to permit flood mitigation structures that meet engineering and safety standards. The vote passed. Not narrowly. Overwhelmingly. The wall that once violated community standards now shaped them. A week later, 2 neighbors submitted applications for reinforced barriers. 3 more requested drainage redesign consultations. The HOA Architectural Review Committee, once aesthetic first, now required hydrology documentation for new builds. And then something else happened. A local news crew showed up. Not because of my wall. Because of the flood damage cluster in an upscale subdivision. They filmed water lines on garage walls. Interviewed homeowners about insurance frustrations. One neighbor mentioned that a single property had avoided damage due to proactive mitigation. The reporter asked if that homeowner had faced resistance. Several residents exchanged looks. No one said much, but the implication lingered. Public perception matters. And board members know that. By the end of the month, the HOA president resigned to focus on personal matters. No scandal. No confrontation, just a quiet departure. Leadership shifted. New board members were elected, including the civil engineer. The flood wall remained. Still not beautiful. Still not decorative. But now it wasn't seen as a scar. It was seen as foresight. What the board failed to realize months earlier was simple. They weren't protecting property values by enforcing aesthetics. They were protecting appearances. And appearances don't stop water. Concrete does. The storm didn't just flood basements. It exposed priorities. And once priorities are exposed, they don't easily return to their original shape. 6 months later, the neighborhood looks almost identical. Fresh paint, new landscaping, recently resealed driveways. If you didn't know what happened, you'd never guess that several basements once held 2 feet of water.
But there are subtle differences now.
3 additional homes have installed reinforced perimeter barriers. 2 properties added discrete steel floodgates near walkout doors. Drainage channels were widened along the main runoff path. And the HOA's updated architectural guidelines now include a full section titled Flood Mitigation and Structural Resilience. The same document that once fined me. There's no mention of my address. No formal acknowledgement. But everyone knows. Because when the next heavy storm rolled through in late season, not as intense, but steady, something remarkable happened. No flooding. Water followed redirected paths. Runoff dispersed efficiently. Garages stayed dry. The group chat was quiet. No panic messages. No emergency contractor requests. Just a few comments like, "Glad we made those upgrades." Resilience doesn't trend. It doesn't photograph well, but it compounds. One evening, I ran into the former HOA president at the mailbox cluster. The conversation was brief, measured. "I suppose the wall worked," she said. "It did," I replied. She nodded once. No sarcasm. No tension. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. Because this was never about humiliation. It was about risk. HOAs often focus on uniformity. Matching fences. Approved paint shades. Symmetrical landscaping. But storms don't care about uniformity. They care about gravity. The board once argued my flood wall disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. What actually disrupted harmony was standing water in living rooms. The fines they issued? Rescinded. The violation? Removed from record. The wall? Still there. Still ugly. Still functional. And here's the irony no one says out loud. Property values didn't drop because of one concrete barrier. They stabilized because flooding risk decreased. Insurance brokers now list community drainage improvements as a selling point. The same structural concept once labeled apocalyptic landscaping is now described as proactive infrastructure. Sometimes the difference between eyesore and asset is timing. The storm didn't just test foundations. It tested judgment. And when the water rose, aesthetic arguments dissolved quickly. Concrete didn't. They mocked the wall. They fined it. They tried to remove it. Then the storm arrived. And the only house that didn't become a swimming pool was the one they called ugly.